1162. That is the year most historians accept as the birth of Temüjin, the boy who would become Genghis Khan. In time, he would unite warring tribes that had fought each other for centuries, forging them into one unstoppable nation. He would ride from the frozen forests of Siberia to the deserts of Persia, conquering more land than any ruler before or after him. His exact birth year drifts in the haze of history, yet 1162 remains the most widely believed, a quiet beginning for a child born beneath the vast Mongolian sky, unaware that his footsteps would one day echo across continents. Even the records cannot agree, and perhaps, as some scholars suggest, Temüjin himself never truly knew the year he entered the world. Only that destiny had been waiting for him on the banks of the Onon River. He was born near the Onon River, where dark waters curve gently through the plains of Khenti. The wind there never stops moving. It carries the scent of grass and distant smoke. The chronicles name the place Deadliest Bulldog, though even that, like much of his story, is whispered with uncertainty. Temüjin was born to Yesugei, a chieftain of the Borjigin clan, and Hoelun, his strong and resolute wife. Legend tells that Hoelun had once been taken from her merchant husband, Chilidu, by Yesugei, a tale of love and conquest woven together. Their son's name, Temüjin, is said to come from a Tatar warrior Yesugei had captured in battle. Others say it comes from Temür, iron. Perhaps both are true, for his life would be forged in conflict and tempered by endurance. Stories of his birth paint him as marked by destiny. Some claim he came into the world clutching a blood clot in his tiny hand, a sign, they said, that he would grow into a warrior. Others whispered that a ray of light entered his mother's tent and touched her womb before he was conceived, echoing the ancient legend of their ancestor, Alan Gua, who bore sons by the spirit of the sky. Temüjin's early years were shaped by the open steppe, endless horizons, galloping horses, the cry of eagles. He had 3 younger brothers, Kasar, Hachiun, and Temüge, and a sister, Temülün. 2 half-brothers, Bader and Belgute, also shared his world, born of his father's other wife. Together, they learned to ride before they could walk far, to loose an arrow before they could speak full sentences. When Temüjin turned 8, his father took him across the grasslands to the land of the Ongarat tribe, seeking a bride for his son. There, among the tents and fires of another people, he met Borte, a girl of quiet dignity, the daughter of a noble chieftain named De Sechen. Their betrothal sealed an alliance, and Temüjin stayed behind to serve in her household, as was tradition. But fate turned quickly. On his journey home, Yesugei shared a meal with strangers, Tatars, his old enemies. They recognized him, smiled, and poured him poisoned broth. By the time he reached his people, he was already fading. As he lay dying, he sent word for his trusted companion, Munglig, to bring Temüjin home. Soon after, the great chieftain breathed his last, leaving behind a boy not yet a man, and a family about to face the cruel vastness of the steppe alone. The river kept flowing, the wind kept moving, and somewhere beneath the open sky, a child named Temüjin began the long, lonely journey toward becoming legend. Yesugei's death in Temüjin's childhood was like a storm passing over the steppe, quiet at first, then devastating. It shattered the fragile unity of his people, who had once gathered proudly beneath his father's banner. The Borjigin, the Taichiud, and their allies scattered like wind-blown ashes. Temüjin was not yet 10, his half-brother Beter only a little older, both far too young to lead. With no strong hand to guide them, their mother, Hoelun, was left to hold together what little remained of their camp. But loyalty fades quickly in the cold of the steppe. The Taichiud clan soon excluded Hoelun from the sacred ancestor ceremonies that followed Yesugei's death, and one by one, the families of the Borjigin turned their backs on her. She called after them with fierce pride, reminding them of honor and kinship. Yet her words fell against the wind. Soon, she and her children were alone. Some accounts, like the secret history of the Mongols, tell of total abandonment, while others claim a few loyal men stayed by her side. Whatever the truth, life became brutal. Hoelun and her children learned to survive not by trade or tribute, but by hunger, living off roots, berries, and fish caught by hand, their nights marked by the lonely howl of wolves. As the years passed, hardship gave way to tension. Both Temüjin and Beter had reason to claim their father's legacy. Temüjin as the son of the chief wife, Beter as the elder. Steppe law even allowed Beter, upon manhood, to take Hoelun as his wife and thus inherit leadership, a cruel possibility that deepened the divide between brothers. One day, as resentment over food and spoils grew unbearable, Temüjin and his younger brother Kasar chose a dark path. They ambushed Beter and killed him, an unthinkable sin. The secret history does not soften the act. It tells of Hoelun's fury, her voice breaking with grief and anger as she scolded the sons she had fought to keep alive. Yet Beter's younger brother, Belgute, did not seek revenge. Instead, he would stand beside Temüjin in the years to come, one of his most loyal companions. It was around this time that Temüjin found a friend, Jamuka, a boy of noble blood like himself. Together, they shared knucklebones, arrows, and childhood dreams beneath the open sky. They swore the Anda oath, a bond of brotherhood sealed not by family, but by choice. The world around them, however, remained perilous. Temüjin was captured more than once, a boy without allies or protection. Once, he was taken by the Taichiuds, bound and held like a prize. During a feast, he seized a moment of chaos to flee into the dark, hiding first in the waters of the Onon River. A man named Sorkin Shira spotted him, and instead of sounding the alarm, chose mercy. For 3 days, he hid the fugitive child, fed him, and guided him to safety. Soon after, another stranger would join his life, Boorchu, a young herdsman who helped Temüjin recover stolen horses. Their meeting, simple yet fateful, marked the start of a lifelong friendship. Boorchu became Temüjin's first nokor, a personal companion, loyal by will, not blood. These early tales of betrayal, brotherhood, and survival reveal not the conqueror he would become, but the boy who endured everything the world could take from him and still found people worth trusting in a land that offered him none. When Temüjin reached 15, he returned to the household of Dey Sechin to claim his bride, Berte, the girl to whom he had been promised as a child. Dey Sechin, who had long feared the boy lost to the wilds, greeted him with warmth and relief. The wedding took place under the open Mongolian sky, with horses neighing in the distance and the wind carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Dey Sechin and his wife, Chotan, escorted the young couple back to Temüjin's camp, where Chotan presented Hoelun with a gift, a cloak of soft, dark sable, rich and valuable beyond measure. Seeking favor and protection, Temüjin carried the sable cloak to Togrul, the Khan of the Karaite tribe, an old ally of his late father, Yesugei. Togrul accepted the gift with delight, remembering his past friendship with the Borjigin line. In the young man's eyes, he saw both humility and the spark of ambition. Under Togrul's protection, Temüjin began to gather followers. Among them were loyal men like Jelme, the first of many who would one day call themselves his nokod, or sworn companions. Around this time, Borda gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Kojin, and for a while, their lives were peaceful. But peace rarely lingers on the steppe. One night, vengeance rode out of the north. The Merkits, seeking retribution for the long-ago abduction of Hoelun, descended upon Temüjin's camp with hundreds of riders. The family scattered. Temüjin and his brothers escaped into the refuge of Mount Burkan Khaldun, but Borte and Xochitl were taken captive. Borte was given in marriage to the brother of her mother's stolen husband, completing a cruel circle of fate. Desperate, Temüjin sought aid from two powerful allies, Togrul and his childhood Anda, Jamuka. Both answered his call, each bringing tens of thousands of horsemen. Together, they stormed the Merkit strongholds, and Borte was recovered. Soon after her return, she gave birth to a son, Yochi. Though Temüjin raised the boy as his own, whispers about his true parentage would follow them for years to come, a quiet ache that no power could erase. Over the next decade, Berta bore more children, 3 sons, Chagatai, Ogade, and Tolui, and 4 daughters, Checheigan, Alaka, Tumalun, and Alaltan. Together they built a growing household, and Temüjin's circle widened with each passing season. For a time, he and Jamuka shared one great camp, reforging their childhood bond. They hunted together, laughed together, and swore again their brotherhood beneath the stars. Yet friendship between ambitious men is rarely eternal. Subtle slights and silent envy began to stir. Some say it was a careless remark by Jamuka that broke the bond. Others believe Temüjin had already outgrown his friend's shadow. Following the counsel of Hoelun and Borte, Temüjin chose independence. He left Jamuka's camp and built his own. Many ordinary families, weary of tribal chaos, flocked to him. They saw in Temüjin a man who was fair, disciplined, and merciful. 41 chiefs joined his banner, among them Subutai of the Uriankai and warriors of the Barulas and Olkanud clans. The shamans began to whisper that heaven itself had chosen him. Before long, Temüjin's followers hailed him as Khan, ruler of the Mongols. Togrul celebrated his rise, but Jamuka's heart burned with resentment. In time, their friendship turned to rivalry, and at Dalan Baljut they met in battle. The fight was fierce and evenly matched, but Temüjin's forces broke and fled. Later, chroniclers would try to rewrite the story, claiming victory for him. But the truth lies buried in dust and silence. What followed remains uncertain. Some say Temüjin vanished from the steppe, living for years among the lands of the Jurchen Jin dynasty in northern China, perhaps even as a servant or soldier. Others say he sought wisdom there, learning the ways of governance and war. Whatever the truth, when he returned, he was no longer merely a warrior or wanderer. He was something greater, a man forged by exile, tempered by loss, and destined to unite the world beneath the endless Mongolian sky. When Temüjin returned to the steppe, the winds of fate had shifted. The exact story of his return is uncertain. Each source tells it differently. But it was around the summer of 1196 that he rose once again into prominence. That year, he joined the mighty Jin dynasty in a campaign against the Tatars, who had turned against their former masters. The victory earned him the honorific Cha-ut Kuri, a Jurchen title meaning commander of hundreds. It was more than a name. It marked his transformation from wandering exile to a recognized leader. Around the same time, he aided his old ally Togrul, helping him reclaim the throne of the Karaite tribe, which had been usurped by a treacherous relative with Naiman support. This act restored Togrul's rule, but elevated Temüjin even further. Though still formally his vassal, Temüjin was now his equal, a power in his own right across the Mongolian plains. Meanwhile, Jamuka, his former Anda, fell deeper into cruelty. After his earlier victory at Dalan Baljut, he had boiled his prisoners alive and desecrated their bodies. The brutality shocked even the hardened steppe. Many of his followers deserted him, drawn instead to Temüjin's sense of justice and his growing wealth. Among them were the sons of Munglig, who had once served Temüjin's father. Temüjin soon turned his attention to the Jurchen tribe, who had insulted him and refused his call to arms. He crushed their rebellion and executed their chiefs, ordering his half-brother Belgute to symbolically break one of their leaders' backs in a staged wrestling match, an act both theatrical and grim. Even the secret history disapproved of this vengeance, but it marked a shift. Temüjin was no longer just surviving, he was commanding. Through the years that followed, Temüjin and Togrul campaigned side by side, defeating the Merkits, Naimans, and Tatars in a string of fierce battles. Yet not all tribes accepted their dominance. Around 1201, the Taichud, Tatars, Ongirat, and others, discontented and proud, united under Jamuka, declaring him Gurkhan, the Khan of all Khans. The alliance was powerful, but Temüjin's discipline and strategy prevailed. At Yedikunan, he and Togrul shattered the rebel confederation, forcing Jamuka to beg for mercy. Temüjin pressed on. He defeated the Taichud and in 1202 crushed the Tatars entirely. Their leaders were executed, their warriors absorbed into his ranks. Among the new recruits were two names that would echo through history: Sorkhan Shira, the man who had once saved Temüjin as a boy, and Jebi, a young warrior who had shot Temüjin's horse in battle and confessed with fearless honesty. Instead of punishment, Temüjin saw loyalty and courage and elevated him on the spot. By now, the steppe held only three great powers: the Naimans in the west, the Karaite in the center, and the Mongols in the east. Temüjin sought to strengthen his position through marriage, proposing that his son Jochi wed one of Togrul's daughters. But envy and suspicion poisoned the plan. Togrul's son Sengum saw it as a bid for power, and whispers about Jochi's birth only deepened the insult. Jamuka, ever watchful, warned the Karaite nobles that Temüjin was a danger to the old order, raising commoners to noble rank and threatening their traditions. Persuaded by fear and pride, Togrul turned against his once loyal ally. An ambush was planned, but two humble herdsmen overheard the plot and carried word to Temüjin. Though caught unprepared, he managed to rally some of his men. At Kala Kaljid Sands, they fought desperately, but the Karaite forces prevailed. Temüjin was forced to retreat, wounded and scattered. He fled to Baljuna, a quiet lake or river whose exact place is lost to time. There, under the vast sky, Temüjin gathered what remained of his followers. Many were injured, starving, and half-clothed, yet they stood by him. Raising his hands to heaven, Temüjin swore an oath, the Baljuna covenant, promising that if he ever achieved greatness, he would share his fortune with those who had suffered beside him. Warriors from 9 different tribes stood with him that day, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Mongols alike, united not by blood, but by loyalty. When his army reformed, Temüjin struck back. Using a clever ruse devised by his brother Kasar, he ambushed the Karat at Jejer Heights. The battle raged for 3 days, ending with Togrul's death, ironically slain by a Naiman who did not recognize him. Temüjin spared no time in securing his victory. He absorbed the Karat nobles into his own ranks, took the princess Ibaka as his wife, and married her sister and niece into his family line. The Naimans, now swollen with the remnants of defeated tribes, rose next. At Chakimaut in 1204, in the shadow of the Altai Mountains, Temüjin crushed them completely. Their leader, Tayan Khan, fell in battle, and his son Kuchlug fled west into obscurity. Later that same year, the Merkits were wiped out, and Jamuka, betrayed by his own companions, was captured. Temüjin executed the traitors for their disloyalty, but granted Jamuka an honorable death as one Anda to another. The wars of unification were ending, the rival Khans were gone, and the tribes of the steppe, once divided and hostile, now bent the knee. From this quiet aftermath rose a single ruler, hardened by loss, guided by destiny. The winds of Mongolia carried his name across the plains. Temüjin, soon to be Genghis Khan. In the spring of 1206, at the tranquil source of the Onon River, the tribes of the steppe gathered beneath the open sky. Horses grazed along the riverbanks, and the air carried the hum of anticipation. There, Temüjin, now the undisputed master of the Mongolian plains, called a great assembly, a Kurultai, unlike any before it. When the crowd fell silent, he rose before them. The wind tugged at his cloak, and the river shimmered behind him like polished steel. In that sacred moment, he was given a new name, Genghis Khan. The meaning of it has been debated ever since. Some say it meant firm or righteous. Others claim it was drawn from Tengiz, the word for ocean, implying master of the ocean, the ruler whose domain stretched as far as the seas themselves. Whatever its origin, it carried the weight of destiny. To the gathered tribes, it was not just a title, it was a prophecy. From that day forward, Genghis Khan began what some would later call a social revolution. The old tribal world, bound by bloodlines, rivalries, and family feuds, was to be remade. He understood that no empire could stand if it leaned only on kinship and pride. So, he broke the tribes apart, not through cruelty, but through structure. He erased the lines that divided families and clans, and in their place, he built a single nation of soldiers, loyal only to him. The Mongol world was reborn in order. Every man between 15 and 70 became part of a great military system. 1,000 men formed a Mingkan. Each Mingkan was divided into hundreds, jagun, and tens, arban. But these were more than armies. They were families, self-sustaining and united, with households bound to each warrior's unit. Old loyalties faded, new ones took root. Men no longer fought for tribe or chief, but for the great Mongol state. The structure worked so flawlessly that, even long after Genghis's death, his descendants ruled without the tribes ever turning on each other again. For centuries, from the steppes to the edges of the world, even mighty conquerors like Timur bowed symbolically to the bloodline of the great Khan. his loyal companions were richly rewarded. Bo-Or-Chu, the steadfast friend who had once chased down stolen horses with him, was placed in command of 10,000 riders. Mukali, calm and brilliant, commanded another 10,000. 95 more Minkad were entrusted to other loyal men, many born to humble lives, blacksmiths, shepherds, and carpenters who had proven their worth not by lineage, but by loyalty. The 2 herdsmen who once saved him from Togrul's ambush were among them, raised to honor in front of the very nobles who once mocked them. To protect himself and train his best, Genghis expanded the Keshig, his personal guard and household, from a small band into an elite corps of 10,000. They were not only his protectors, but his closest advisors, stewards, and administrators. Sons of great commanders served there as hostages of loyalty, yet they were treated as brothers of the Khan himself. The Keshig became a school of power, where young men learned to rule and command. From its ranks would rise names that would echo through history: Subutai, Chormakhan, Baiju, men who would lead armies across continents in the years to come. At the Onon River, beneath the same sky where he had been born, Temüjin's long struggle reached its transformation. No longer a fugitive or a warlord, he had become something the steppe had never seen before. A ruler not just of men, but of order. Genghis Khan, the unifier of the Mongols, the architect of a nation that would soon change the world. From 1204 to 1209, Genghis Khan turned inward, focused less on conquest and more on shaping the fragile heart of his new empire. The years of constant war had ended. What remained was to hold together a people born from chaos. Yet even in peace, danger took quieter forms. Among the greatest threats came not from armies, but from faith. A shaman named Kokachu, known as Teb-Tengeri, Holy Heavenly. Once, his father had served Genghis and married his mother Hoelun after defecting to their cause. Now Kokachu used his spiritual influence to sow distrust within the Golden family itself. He spoke with the authority of the gods, and many commoners revered him. His words turned brother against brother, first targeting Kasar, Genghis's fierce but proud sibling, who was humiliated under false charges before Hoelun intervened with the sharp command only a mother could give. Still, Kokachu's power grew. Even the youngest brother, Temuga, who tried to defy him, was publicly mocked. Berta saw what others would not, that this was no mere holy man, but a rival in spirit and power. She warned Genghis, who had long held superstitious respect for shamans, that his empire could not have 2 voices from heaven. Soon after, Temuga arranged the shaman's death, and Genghis quietly took his place as the sole spiritual and political axis of Mongol life, the living bridge between earth and sky. Beyond the steppe, his influence continued to spread. In 1207, he sent his eldest son Yoki northward to subdue the tribes along the edge of the Siberian taiga. Through diplomacy and force, Yoki united them under Mongol rule, establishing control over the region's gold mines and trade routes in grain and furs. To the west, Genghis's armies defeated the Naiman-Merkit alliance along the Irtysh River, their Khan slain, and their fugitive Kuchlug fleeing deep into Central Asia. In time, even the Uyghurs broke free from their overlords and pledged allegiance to Genghis, the first settled nation to bow willingly to the Mongols. But the greatest test came in the south. In 1205, Mongol horsemen began raiding the frontier of the Tangut-led kingdom of Western Xia. Officially, it was retribution. The Tanguts had offered refuge to Sengum, Togrul's treacherous son, yet perhaps it was also necessity. The young empire needed grain, livestock, and trade. The raids grew bolder, and in 1209, Genghis himself led his first full-scale invasion beyond the steppe. The Mongols struck swiftly, capturing the fortress of Wulahai and advancing toward the Tangut capital, Zhongxing, today's Yinchuan. But the Xia resisted fiercely. For 2 months, both sides held firm until Genghis lured their army from the safety of its walls with a feigned retreat, a trick as old as the steppe itself. When the Tanguts broke formation to pursue, his cavalry swept back like a storm and crushed them. Yet victory did not bring the city. Zhongxing stood strong, its walls thick and high, and the Mongols lacked siege engines. In desperation, Genghis ordered the Yellow River diverted to flood the capital. For a time, it seemed to work, until the dam collapsed, drowning the Mongol camp instead. The Khan, soaked and furious, withdrew his forces. Peace came soon after. The Tangut emperor submitted, offering tribute, gold, silk, horses, and his daughter Princess Chaka to the great Khan. In return, Genghis withdrew, not as a defeated raider, but as a recognized sovereign. The empire was no longer a dream of the steppe. It was becoming something far greater. A nation with borders, diplomacy, and destiny. The boy who had once hidden in rivers and forests now ruled a world that stretched from the frozen taiga to the edge of the desert, where even kings sent their daughters to appease him. By 1209, Genghis Khan had unified the steppe, but his eyes had turned south, toward the Jin Empire. That same year, a new emperor, Wanyan Yongji, seized the Jin throne. He was a man Genghis already despised, a border official who had once treated the Mongols with arrogance. When Yongji demanded tribute in 1210, Genghis gave his answer in silence. He spat on the ground before the envoy and rode away. It was an insult that could mean only one thing: war. The Jin Empire was vast. Its army said to number 600,000, perhaps 8 times greater than Genghis's. But sheer numbers had never frightened the Mongols. He had been preparing for this campaign for years, knowing the Jin were crumbling from within. His goals were twofold: to avenge the death of Ambagai Khan, a Borjigin ancestor executed by the Jin generations earlier, and to bring home the wealth his soldiers had long been promised. In the spring of 1211, a Kurultai was called. Riders gathered from across the plains, banners fluttering in the mountain wind. When they departed in May, 3 great Mongol columns moved south, crossing the desert and entering Jin territory. At the border stood the Ongud tribes, commanded by Alakush, allies now, who opened the gates without resistance. The invasion swept like wildfire. The Mongols burned, raided, and captured fortresses, breaking supply lines and demoralizing the Jin. Defections spread rapidly. By autumn, Mughali, one of Genghis's most trusted generals, delivered a stunning victory at Huanerzui. But fate briefly turned. During the siege of Xijing in 1212, an arrow struck Genghis, forcing a retreat. He used the setback to learn. Over the next 2 years, he gathered captured engineers and artisans, 500 in all, and formed his first corps of siege specialists. For the first time, the horsemen of the steppe began to master the machinery of war. By 1213, the Jin had fortified Juyong Pass, their last great barrier before the capital, Zhengdu. modern Beijing. Yet the Mongol commander Jabi, swift and cunning, slipped through the mountains and struck the defenders from within, opening the road to the heart of northern China. Then came chaos. Within the Jin court, rebellion broke out. Yongji was murdered in a coup, and a new puppet emperor was installed. Genghis advanced, but his army was exhausted. Plague and famine struck. Some chroniclers claim cannibalism spread among the ranks, though such tales were likely exaggerated. With winter approaching, Genghis agreed to peace. The Jin emperor paid dearly, thousands of horses, hundreds of slaves, and mountains of gold, silk, and tribute. But peace did not last. When Emperor Xuanzong moved the capital south to Kaifeng in 1214, Genghis saw it as betrayal, a move to rebuild and resist. He prepared one final strike. Mukhali, ever loyal, swept through Liaodong, seizing town after town. In the spring of 1215, Zhongdu fell. The city surrendered, and the Mongols entered, sacking it utterly. By the time Genghis returned to Mongolia in 1216, the north of China lay in ashes. Behind him, he left Mukhali to govern the conquered lands. Ruthless yet efficient, Mukhali crushed rebellions and brought order through fear and force, ruling in Genghis's name until his death years later. The war against the Jin had proven a new truth. The Mongols were no longer a nation of horsemen raiding the borders. They were now an empire, capable of bringing dynasties to their knees. And Genghis Khan, the man once hunted across the steppe, now ruled from the edge of the Siberian forests to the gates of the Great Wall. By 1207, Genghis Khan's empire stretched deep into the northern wilderness, reaching the cold forests and river valleys of Siberia. There, among the subdued Hoyin-Irgun tribes, he placed a man named Korchi as governor, not because of his skill, but because of old loyalty. Yet power revealed Korchi's flaws. He abused his position, seizing women for his harem and ruling through fear instead of justice. His arrogance lit the embers of rebellion. In early 1216, the tribes rose against him, capturing their own governor. The following year, they struck again, ambushing and killing Barakal, one of Genghis's dearest companions and most trusted generals. To the great Khan, this was more than betrayal. It was personal loss. Barakal had ridden with him through hardship and conquest, a brother in all but blood. The news of his death filled Genghis with fury, and he prepared to lead the campaign himself. Only with great persuasion was he dissuaded from taking the field. Instead, he sent his eldest son, Yochi, accompanied by a skilled commander of the Durbet. They rode swiftly and struck without mercy, defeating the rebels and restoring Mongol control over the vital northern trade routes, rich in furs, gold, and timber. Meanwhile, far to the west, another old enemy had resurfaced. Kuchlug, the proud Naiman prince who had once fled Genghis's wrath, had seized the throne of the Kara Kitai between 1211 and 1213. His rule was cruel and greedy. He tried to erase Islam from his lands, forcing conversion to Buddhism and punishing those who resisted. The people, weary and angry, began to whisper prayers for deliverance. Genghis saw opportunity in their suffering. In 1218, he sent his brilliant general Jebe westward with 20,000 cavalry. Jebe's campaign was not only one of swords, but of persuasion. He spread word that the Mongols did not demand faith, only loyalty. Under his banners, people of every religion found refuge. One city after another opened its gates to him. Kuchlug fled into the high Pamir Mountains, desperate and alone. But even there, he could not escape. Local hunters captured him and delivered him to the Mongols. Jebe ordered his execution, a single clean beheading, and his body was carried through the cities he had once ruled, a warning and a promise both, that Genghis Khan's empire would never persecute belief. With Kuchlug's fall, the old realm of the Kara Kitai came under Mongol rule, stretching Genghis's influence all the way into Central Asia. The borders of the world he commanded now reached from the frozen Siberian forests to the sunlit sands of Turkestan, a vast empire united not only by conquest, but by the strange, steady order of the man who had forged it. By the year 1218, Genghis Khan's empire stretched from the frozen forests of Siberia to the rich oases of Central Asia. He now controlled the entire eastern stretch of the Silk Road, the lifeline of trade between East and West. Beyond his western frontier lay the vast Khwarezmian Empire, ruled by Shah Muhammad II, whose dominion reached across Persia, Afghanistan, and much of Central Asia. For a brief moment, peace seemed possible. Merchants from both realms longed to reopen the trade routes that had fallen silent during Kuchlug's reign. Muhammad II sent envoys bearing words of friendship, and Genghis, trusting in the promise of commerce, sent forth a great caravan of 450 merchants. They carried silks, gold, and rare goods, investments from the most powerful members of the Altan Uruk, the Golden Family itself. But the caravan never reached its destination. At Otrar, a Khwarezmian frontier city, its governor Inalchuk accused the Mongol merchants of espionage. The traders were slaughtered, their goods seized. Genghis, stunned but restrained, sent an envoy demanding justice. Muhammad II's reply was unforgivable. The ambassador was executed, his companions humiliated and sent back alive. In the world of the steppe, killing an envoy was the gravest insult, one that could be answered only with war. Genghis Khan gathered his generals, left Macaulay in command of China, and began his march west. The Khwarezmian Empire was enormous, but fragile. Its ruler shared power uneasily with his ambitious mother, Turken Khatun, and his court was rife with division. His generals distrusted him, his nobles despised him, and his people were weary of his endless wars. When Genghis's armies arrived, Muhammad refused to meet them in open battle, hiding instead behind the walls of his fortified cities. In the autumn of 1219, the Mongols reached Otrar. For 5 long months the city resisted, but hunger and terror broke its defense. When it finally fell, Inalchuk was captured and executed. Molten silver poured into his eyes, according to legend. Genghis then split his army into 3 great columns. Chagatai and Ogadai besieged Otrar. Yochi moved north along the Sirdarya, and Genghis himself, with Tolui, led the main force across the Kizilkum Desert in a daring march that no army had ever attempted. In February 1220, they appeared like a mirage before Bukhara. The city's defenders surrendered in disbelief. Genghis rode into the Friday mosque, dismounted, and declared, "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent me as a punishment upon you." The city was plundered, and its wealth poured into Mongol hands. Samarkand fell soon after. The Shah fled in panic, abandoning his people. Genghis dispatched his generals Jebe and Subutai to hunt him down. Across deserts, rivers, and mountains they pursued him, until he died of illness on a lonely island in the Caspian Sea, a king without a kingdom. The Mongols pressed on. To the north, Genghis's sons Chagatai, Ogadai, and Jochi besieged Gurganj, the Khwarezmian capital. The siege dragged into spring 1221, ending in fire and slaughter as the city was razed to the ground. Meanwhile, the Shah's son, Jalal al-Din, rallied the remnants of his father's army in Afghanistan. He fought bravely, even defeating Genghis's adopted son, Shigi Kutuku, at Parwan, one of the rare Mongol defeats. But his victory was fleeting. Disunity among his commanders led to ruin at the Battle of the Indus. In November 1221, Jalal al-Din was crushed and forced to flee across the river into India, barely escaping with his life. While these battles raged, Genghis's youngest son, Tolui, unleashed devastation upon Khorasan. City after city fell beneath the Mongol advance. Nishapur, Merv, and Herat, once jewels of the Islamic world, were reduced to ash and silence. The slaughter was so great that Persian historians claimed over 5 million lives were lost, though even modern estimates, a fraction of that number, describe it as one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. By 1222, the Khwarezmian Empire had ceased to exist. The Silk Road once again flowed freely, but at a terrible cost. And as the smoke of burning cities drifted into the sky, the world began to understand what Genghis Khan truly was. Not just a conqueror, but a force of nature, relentless, disciplined, and unstoppable. By 1221, after years of relentless conquest, Genghis Khan suddenly halted his campaigns across Central Asia. His armies had swept through cities and deserts from Bukhara to the Hindu Kush, but now the great conqueror turned back. Originally, he had planned to return through India, yet the fierce heat and dense humidity of the subcontinent stifled his cavalry and weakened his horses. To Genghis, even the omens spoke against continuing. He chose instead to withdraw northward, leaving behind a frontier that ran along the Amu Darya River, the farthest western border of his empire. Before departing, he ensured that order, not chaos, would follow in his wake. He appointed Darugachi, commissioners known as those who press the seal, to govern newly conquered lands, and Baskak, local officials charged with collecting tribute and restoring daily life. What the sword had conquered, the seal would now preserve. His empire was learning to govern as well as to fight. During his long return through the mountains of the Hindu Kush, Genghis summoned a man of wisdom, Changchun, the Taoist patriarch famed for his spiritual insight. The old sage traveled thousands of miles to meet him. In their quiet conversation, the conqueror listened, not as a ruler, but as a student. Changchun spoke of moderation, of simplicity, of the balance between life and death. Genghis listened in the stillness, and when they parted, he granted the Taoists freedom from taxation and authority over monks across his empire, a privilege that would later stir rivalry between Taoists and Buddhists. Yet even as he returned home, the steppe was whispering of rebellion. The Western Xia, the Tangut kingdom that had once bowed to him, had refused to provide troops for his Central Asian war. Some chroniclers claim this disobedience was the spark that ignited his anger. Others suggest they remained loyal until 1223, breaking faith only after Mughali's death left China's northern front unstable. Whatever the truth, the outcome was certain. Genghis would not let their defiance go unanswered. By early 1225, he had returned to Mongolia. The empire he had forged now spanned nearly all of Asia, yet his gaze fixed once again on the desert and the walls of the Western Xia. He spent that year preparing for war, not the reckless storm of youth, but the deliberate strike of a ruler settling unfinished business. In the first months of 1226, his armies swept into the Gansu corridor, capturing the city of Karakoto, the Black City. From there, they moved relentlessly eastward, razing towns, burning fortresses, and sparing only those who surrendered without resistance. When autumn came, Genghis crossed the Yellow River and laid siege to Lingwu, a key fortress just south of the Xia capital, Zhongxing. On December 4th, 1226, the Xia sent their relief army to drive him away. Genghis met them on open ground and crushed them. The victory was decisive. He left the siege of Zhongxing to his generals, turning south with his trusted commander Subutai to plunder the lands of the Jin and ensure that no ally of the Tanguts could rise in their defense. After decades of conquest, the old Khan's campaigns were entering their final act. His empire stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian, from the Siberian forests to the edge of Persia. Yet Genghis rode still, driven not by greed or glory, but by an unyielding conviction that every rebellion must end, every promise must be kept, and every defiance answered. In the cold winter of 1226 to 27, while hunting in the mountains, Genghis Khan fell from his horse. The injury seemed minor at first, but as the weeks passed, his strength waned. He grew feverish and weak, carried from camp to camp on a litter, while his generals continued the siege of Zhongxing, the western Xia capital. His sons urged him to abandon the campaign and return to Mongolia to heal. The Xia, they reasoned, would still be there next year. But Genghis refused. The Tanguts had defied him, and their commander had mocked him openly. For Genghis Khan, the insult could not stand. He ordered the siege to continue. The Mongol war machine moved relentlessly, even as its master faded. In the late summer of 1227, somewhere on the parched plains of Ningxia, the great Khan died, either on the 18th or the 25th of August. His death was kept secret. The army pressed on, unaware, and within weeks, Zhongxing fell. The city's population was massacred, and the Tangut kingdom was erased from history. Their culture, their books, their name itself, all were extinguished. Historians would later call it one of the most complete annihilations ever recorded. As for how Genghis died, no one truly knows. Some accounts say he succumbed to illness, perhaps typhus, malaria, or the plague. Others tell of a wound from an arrow, or even lightning striking him from the heavens. Then there are the legends that a Tangut princess, forced to be his concubine, fatally wounded him with a hidden dagger. The truth, like the man himself, remains shrouded in myth. After his death, his body was carried north in solemn silence. The road home stretched thousands of miles, through deserts, across rivers, and over the steppes where he had once ridden as a boy. At last, his funeral caravan reached the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun in the Khenti range, the mountain he had loved all his life, the place where he had once hidden as a hunted youth. There, in secret, he was buried. The mountain was declared Ich Korig, the great taboo. No one but its Urienkai guards could enter. It became a forbidden zone, untouched by time. When his son, Ogedei, took the throne 2 years later, the empire held 3 days of offerings. 30 maidens were sacrificed in his honor, their lives given to accompany the man who had conquered more of the world than any ruler before him. To this day, the resting place of Genghis Khan remains undiscovered. Somewhere beneath the forests and hills of Mongolia, the great Khan lies hidden, the man who had united the steppe, shattered empires, and reshaped the world, now sleeping beneath the land that had once whispered his name in the wind. And that is where we close our story tonight. The winds that once carried the echo of Genghis Khan's armies have long fallen silent. The steppe he ruled over is calm now, its grass swaying under the same endless sky he once gazed upon. History remembers him as a conqueror, but perhaps it's worth remembering, too, that he was a man, one who began as an orphan, hunted and hungry, and who rose to unite a world that had never known unity. As you rest, think of that journey, from the banks of the Onon River to the farthest corners of the earth. Empires rise, empires fall, but the stories they leave behind endure, whispered softly, like the wind across the steppe. Good night. You've been listening to boring biographies for sleep, where even history takes its time to drift off.